The chandeliers in the grand dining hall of Daesung Hill residence were lit so brilliantly that the light bounced off crystal glasses and expensive cufflinks like scattered diamonds. 47 of Korea's most powerful people sat at a table so long it could have seated a small army. Politicians with careful smiles. Executives with cold eyes. Women draped in silk who never raised their voices above a murmur. The kind of room where everything was controlled, every word, every glance, every silence. Nobody moved without purpose in that room. Nobody entered without permission. Which is exactly why every single head turned when the door opened. She was 4 years old. She wore a yellow dress with a small white collar, and her feet made the softest tapping sound on the marble floor because her shoes were just slightly too big for her. She held something against her chest with both hands, a folded piece of paper, crayon-colored, creased at the corners like it had been carried very carefully for a very long time. Her face was serious, determined. She had somewhere to be, and she knew exactly where that was. Nobody stopped her. Not because they couldn't, but because something about the way she walked made grown adults freeze. She moved through that room like she had been expected, like she belonged there more than any of them did. The murmuring stopped. Forks were set down. A government minister leaned toward his wife and whispered something, but even he went quiet when the little girl reached the center of the table. She stopped directly in front of the man at the head. Kang Min-Jae, 35 years old. Owner of Myri Holdings. A man whose name alone could shift stock markets. He sat perfectly still in his chair, jaw set, expression unreadable, wearing a dark suit that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. He had not smiled once during the entire dinner. He rarely smiled anywhere. But when the little girl stopped in front of him and looked up with those enormous, serious eyes, something happened to his face that nobody in that room had ever seen before. He went completely, utterly still. Not the controlled stillness he performed in boardrooms. Something different. Something that looked almost like being caught. The little girl lifted the folded paper and held it out to him with both hands. "I made this for you," she said, in a voice that was clear and unhurried and completely unbothered by the 47 powerful people staring at her. "I worked on it for 3 days." The silence in that room became something physical. Something that pressed against the walls. Min-Jae looked at the paper. Then at her face. Then slowly, he reached out and took it. He unfolded it. A child's drawing. Crayon. Slightly lopsided. 3 figures holding hands. A tall man in a black suit, a woman with natural hair and warm brown skin, and a small girl in a yellow dress. Above them, in large uneven letters that a 4-year-old hand had pressed hard into the page. Home. The woman sitting to Min-Jae's right made a sound. Soft and sharp at the same time. Seo Rin-ah, elegant, untouchable, the woman who wore the invisible title of future mistress of this estate, turned to look at the child with an expression that she barely managed to keep composed. "Security," she said quietly. But Min-Jae raised one hand. Just one hand. And every person in that room understood, without a single word of explanation, that nobody was moving. From across the room, behind the serving station near the east wall, a woman in a staff uniform stood with a tray suspended halfway between the table and her chest. Her hands were shaking. Not from the weight of the tray. The food on it had gone cold 10 minutes ago and she hadn't noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the little girl at the head of the table, and her throat had closed so completely that she couldn't have spoken if the room had caught fire. Amara Okafor stood very still and watched her 4-year-old daughter walk into the center of the most dangerous moment of their lives. And somewhere in the chaos of terror and love and shame and something else she couldn't name, she watched Min-Jae unfold that drawing with hands that were almost gentle. The narrator's voice dropped low, the way it does just before something changes forever. 3 weeks ago, none of this existed. 3 weeks ago, Amara Okafor was just a woman trying to survive. Nia was just a little girl who talked to flowers. And Kang Min-Jae was just a man who had forgotten what warmth felt like. 3 weeks ago, it was raining. It was always raining in the parts of the story that mattered. The night Amara arrived at Daesung Hill residence for the first time, the rain came down in sheets so thick that the lights of the estate barely penetrated it. She stood at the staff entrance with a small rolling suitcase, a backpack over one shoulder, and a sleeping 4-year-old pressed against her chest. Nia's head rested on her mother's collarbone, mouth slightly open, completely trusting in the way that only small children and animals ever truly are. Amara shifted her weight carefully, trying not to wake her. The daycare had called at 4:30 that afternoon. Flooding in the lower district. Closed until further notice. Amara had stood in the tiny apartment she was renting by the week and done the math 3 different ways, and every time the answer came out the same. She could not afford to miss this shift. She had used her last proper savings getting to Busan. The agency had placed her here after 2 weeks of paperwork and background checks and a reference from a woman in Marseille who had known her before everything fell apart. This job was not optional. This job was the thread she was holding with both hands. So she had dressed Nia in her warmest clothes, packed the small backpack with crayons and a juice box and the worn fabric rabbit that Nia called Biscuit, and she had come. She would figure out the details. She always figured out the details. That was the only skill she had never lost. Mr. Bay met her at the staff entrance with a clipboard and an expression that suggested he had seen everything and was impressed by none of it. He was a compact man in his late 50s, silver-haired, with the kind of posture that comes from decades of managing powerful people's expectations. "Miss Okafor," he said, looking first at her face, then at the sleeping child, then back at her face. His expression did not change, but something moved behind his eyes. "I'm aware this is irregular," Amara said immediately. Her voice was steady. She had practiced steadiness the way other people practiced instruments. Her daycare closed without notice this evening. "It will not happen again. I'll keep her in the staff corridor. She sleeps deeply and she's very well behaved. She won't go anywhere." Mr. Bay looked at Nia for a long moment. Nia, as if sensing the weight of the moment even in sleep, made a small sound and pressed her face harder into Amara's neck. Mr. Bay clicked his pen twice. "The residential floors are strictly off-limits," he said. "Staff corridor only. East wing cleaning tonight. Start with the lobby, move to the second-floor hallway, avoid the private library wing entirely. That means the 3rd corridor on the left. Do you understand?" "Completely." "The child stays seated." "She will." He nodded once, the way people nod when they want no further conversation, and held the door open. Amara walked through it. She found a chair near the staff break room that was tucked into an alcove just wide enough to feel like a contained space. She set Nia down gently and the little girl stirred, blinking slowly, looking around at the unfamiliar surroundings with sleepy curiosity. "Where are we?" Nia asked. "Work," Amara said softly, kneeling in front of her. She opened the backpack and placed the crayons on the small side table, then the juice box, then Biscuit the rabbit. She tucked a light blanket around Nia's lap. "Mommy has to go clean some rooms. I'll be back in 5 minutes. Every time I come back, I'll check on you." "Okay," Nia said. "Nia." Amara held the little girl's face between her palms and looked at her seriously. "You stay in this chair. You don't walk anywhere. You don't open any doors. You don't talk to anyone except to say hello. Do you understand me?" "I understand you," Nia said. In that tone she had that sounded like a tiny adult trying not to patronize someone. "I'll draw." "Good girl." Amara kissed her forehead, stood up, took her cleaning cart, and walked down the hall. She told herself 5 minutes. She was gone 7. When she came back, the blanket was still on the chair. The juice box was still on the table. The crayons were still there. Nia was not. The cold that moved through Amara's chest in that moment was not like fear. It was deeper than fear. Fear was loud and adrenaline bright. This was quiet and total, like the lights in a room going out all at once. She stood very still for 1 full second, the way a person does before they understand what they're looking at. Then she moved. She searched the break room first. Empty. Then the laundry corridor, long, fluorescent lit, smelling of clean linen. Empty. The storage room behind the east stairwell. The small indoor garden near the heating units where ferns grew in ceramic pots. She opened doors quietly, carefully, unable to call out because new staff could not create disturbances, because Mr. Bay was somewhere in this building, because if she screamed Nia's name down a marble hallway she would lose this job before the shift was half over, and then where would they be? Where would they go? There was nowhere left to go. She was turning toward the 2nd corridor when she saw it. One tiny yellow sandal. It sat on the marble floor outside a set of double doors at the far end of the 3rd corridor. The corridor that Mr. Bay had specifically, clearly, precisely told her to avoid. The private library wing. The office of Kang Min-Jae. Amara stood outside those doors and breathed. The doors were not fully closed. A crack of warm amber light came through from inside, and with it, the softest sound, a child's voice, unhurried, explaining something in the methodical way that Nia explained everything, as though the person listening was very lucky to be receiving this information. Amara pushed the door open. The room inside was unlike any library she had ever seen. It rose 2 floors, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on every wall, a rolling ladder on a brass rail, a fireplace that was not lit but still radiated the memory of warmth from its stones. There was a mahogany desk the size of a small boat, covered in neat stacks of documents, and one low lamp that threw golden light across everything. The room smelled like old paper and cedarwood and the particular kind of silence that belongs to spaces where serious thinking happens. In the center of that room, Kang Min-Jae was kneeling on the floor. He was in his full suit. He was, she would learn, always in his full suit, kneeling on the expensive rug in front of his leather chair, and his hands were occupied with something small. He was refastening the buckle on Nia's other sandal, the one still on her foot. He was doing it with the concentrated patience of someone defusing something. Nia sat in his leather chair, the enormous chair behind the enormous desk, eating strawberries from a white porcelain plate that she had clearly helped herself to. She held one up to inspect it before eating it, the way she inspected everything. She was not remotely concerned about where she was, or whose chair she was in, or whose strawberries those were. She was watching the man kneeling in front of her with the expression she reserved for things she found genuinely interesting. "You have sad eyes," Nia said. Min-Jae paused in what he was doing. Just briefly. Then he continued with the sandal buckle. "Do I?" he said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," Nia said with certainty. "My maman says eyes don't lie even when mouths do. Your mouth isn't saying anything, but your eyes are very sad. Your mother sounds observant." "She's very smart," Nia agreed. "She used to have a big company. Now she cleans floors, but she says that doesn't change who she is. She says a person's situation is not their value." She paused to eat the strawberries she'd been holding. "What's your situation?" Min-Jae sat back slightly on his heels and looked at the child in his chair. In the lamplight, his face was difficult to read. It was always difficult to read, but something in the set of his jaw had shifted almost imperceptibly, like a door that has moved a centimeter on its hinges. "I own this house," he said. "I know," Nia said. "Is that why it's so quiet? Big houses are often quiet." "No," Nia said, shaking her head with the confidence of someone who had thought about this deeply. "Big houses are quiet when nobody inside them is happy. Our apartment is small, and it's never quiet because Maman sings when she's cooking and I sing back even when I don't know the words." She selected another strawberry. "Don't you have anyone to sing with?" Something happened to the room in that moment. Not physically. The lamp didn't flicker. The books didn't shift. But the quality of the silence changed, the way it changes just before rain, when the air knows something is coming before any cloud is visible. Min-Jae didn't answer. Nia, who was 4 and therefore had not yet learned the social skill of leaving a silence alone, interpreted his quiet as an invitation to continue. "You can sing with us if you want," she said generously. "Maman knows songs in French and in English and one very long one in Yoruba that she only sings when she thinks I'm asleep." She tilted her head. "What's your name?" "Min-Jae." She tried it. "Min-Jae." She nodded. "That's a good name. I'm Nia. My full name is Nia Celeste Okafor, but mostly people just say Nia." She held out a strawberry to him across the enormous desk. "Do you want one? They're very good." He looked at the strawberry. He took it. It was at this precise moment that Amara appeared in the doorway. She took in the scene, her daughter in the billionaire's chair, the billionaire kneeling on the floor, the plate of strawberries, the small buckled sandal, and every coherent thought she possessed dissolved simultaneously. What replaced them was pure, white-hot mortification so complete that she couldn't speak for a full 3 seconds. "I am so sorry," she finally said. The words came out fast, too fast, running into each other. "I am so incredibly sorry. I left her for 7 minutes and she was supposed to stay in the corridor. I don't know how she found this room. She knows better than this. She absolutely knows better. Nia, come here right now. "Maman," Nia said, lighting up at the sight of her. "This is Min-Jae. He has sad eyes, but he's very nice. He fixed my shoe." "Nia, he has strawberries. Real ones, not the frozen kind." "Nia Celeste, I shared them." Amara pressed her hand briefly over her eyes. Then she lowered it and looked directly at Min-Jae, who had risen from the floor and was now standing at his full height, which was considerable, looking at her with an expression she couldn't categorize. Not anger. Not amusement exactly. Something quieter than both. "I am deeply sorry," she said, and her voice was steady even though nothing else in her was. "This will not happen again. I will collect her immediately, and she won't come within 3 corridors of this wing for the rest of my employment here. I promise you." "She wasn't a problem," Min-Jae said. Amara stopped. "She found the room herself," he continued. "I heard something outside the door and opened it. She was sitting in the hallway talking to your sandal." A pause. "Her sandal?" Nia nodded. "I was telling it to stay put," she explained helpfully. "It kept falling off." Amara looked at her daughter, then back at Min-Jae. She became aware, in the way one becomes aware of small disasters gradually, that there was a damp patch on the front of his shirt. She stared at it. "She," Amara began, "fell asleep against me briefly," Min-Jae said. "It washes." The 2 words landed in the room so simply and completely that Amara didn't know what to do with them. She had been preparing herself for fury, for dismissal, for a phone call to Mr. Bay. She had been calculating which version of an apology would be least likely to get her immediately fired. She had not prepared for "it washes," said in a voice that was entirely matter-of-fact, as though a stranger's child drooling on his probably $10,000 shirt was simply a thing that happened and was of no particular consequence. She stood in the doorway of the most powerful man in Busan's private library and felt something behind her sternum loosen, just slightly, the way a knot loosens when you find the right end to pull. "Come on, my love," she said softly, moving to collect Nia from the chair. But Nia had gone heavy-limbed in the way children do when sleep reclaims them fast, and she pressed her face into her mother's shoulder and was unconscious again within seconds. Amara held her and looked at Min-Jae one final time. "Thank you," she said. "For not, thank you." He nodded once. She carried Nia out of the library and back down the corridor, and she did not look back. She would not let herself look back. She had a shift to finish and a child to keep warm and a life to hold together with her hands, and she could not afford to spend time thinking about the expression on that man's face when Nia had said, "You have sad eyes." She could not afford to think about the way something in that enormous, silent room had felt, for just a moment, like it had exhaled. She was not here for feelings. She was here for the paycheck. She was here to rebuild. She told herself that very firmly as she laid Nia back in the alcove chair, covered her with a blanket, retrieved the fallen crayons from the floor. She told herself that, and she went back to cleaning floors. She was very good at that. The next morning, something changed in the estate that nobody could immediately explain. Near the entrance to the staff corridor, where previously there had been nothing but a wooden bench and a wall, there now sat a small table. On it, a child's drawing set in a flat wooden box, the kind with proper colored pencils and a sharpener and a little magnifying glass, not crayons. A glass of fresh orange juice, still cold, condensation on the outside. A plate of strawberries. There was no note. Madame Un, the head kitchen supervisor, found Amara standing in front of the table with Nia on her hip, the little girl already reaching for the pencil box with barely suppressed excitement. "Don't read into it," Madame Un said, appearing at Amara's elbow with the quiet efficiency of someone who had worked in this estate long enough to understand its patterns. "I'm not reading into anything," Amara said. Madame Un raised one eyebrow. She was a woman of 60 with warm, watchful eyes and the kind of face that had seen enough of the world to find most of it gently amusing. "He asked the kitchen to prepare it before 6 this morning. He knew her name. He said, and I am telling you exactly what he said, there is a child in the staff wing. Her name is Nia. Please make sure she has proper drawing materials and something good to eat in the morning." Amara was quiet. "Madame Un," she said eventually, "how long have you worked here?" 19 years. "Has he ever?" "No," Madame Un said, before the sentence was finished. Never once. She adjusted her apron and began moving back toward the kitchen, and then paused. He also asked Mr. Bay to have the small garden terrace unlocked during afternoon hours. The one off the east corridor. For fresh air. She didn't say for whom. She didn't need to. She walked away. Amara stood with her daughter on her hip, and her daughter's small hand, already full of colored pencils, and something she absolutely refused to name sitting in the center of her chest. And she reminded herself very deliberately of the 17 reasons she could not afford to feel anything in this building except professional. She enumerated all 17. Silently. Firmly. Then she set Nia down, helped her arrange the pencils by color the way she liked them, and went to report for her shift. The garden terrace off the east corridor was a small, carefully maintained space, stone tiles, 3 ornamental trees, a low bench, and planters full of things that bloomed steadily and quietly without requiring much attention. In the late afternoon, when the Busan light came in low and golden over the hills, it was the kind of place that made you feel, briefly, that the world was a more generous thing than it usually seemed. Nia discovered it on the second day. She spent the afternoon there with her pencils and her rabbit and a seriousness of purpose that she brought to all her artistic endeavors. She drew the flowers first, then the trees. Then she began talking to them, in French, explaining each drawing as she completed it. "This one is you," she told a low white flower near the planter's edge, holding up a drawing that captured its spirit if not its precise botany. "You're very small, but you smell excellent. I'm going to call you Marguerite." From the second-floor balcony directly above, Kang Min-Jae stood with a phone pressed to his ear and said nothing for 11 seconds while his Tokyo operations director waited for an answer to a question about a shipping contract worth $40 million. The director said, "Mr. Kang? Are you still there?" "Push the meeting," Min-Jae said. "The entire. To next week. Push it." He ended the call. He stood on the balcony for another 10 minutes watching a 4-year-old explain the emotional interior lives of garden plants to the garden plants themselves. He did not go back inside immediately. This was unusual enough that the assistant who found him there, hovering with a tablet full of urgent correspondence, actually stopped in the doorway and reassessed whether to interrupt. She decided not to. She had worked for Min-Jae for 3 years, and she had a well-developed instinct for self-preservation, and something about the quality of his stillness suggested that whatever was happening, interrupting it would be the wrong choice. She went back to her desk and rescheduled 2 conference calls without being asked. The conversations between Min-Jae and Amara did not begin deliberately. They accumulated the way water accumulates in low places, not from any single source, but from everywhere at once, gathering because that's simply where it goes. The first real one happened on the 4th evening of her employment, when Amara arrived for her shift to find Min-Jae in the staff corridor near the kitchen, which was not where he was supposed to be, which was not where he ever was. He was looking at a framed photograph on the wall, a picture of the estate taken in its early years, when the garden was younger and the trees were smaller. He had a glass of something in one hand and the expression of a person who is not looking at what they're looking at. Amara said, "Good evening," because she could not say nothing. He turned, looked at her, said, "Your shift starts early." "It always starts at 8. You're here at 7:40. She had been early because Nia had fallen asleep earlier than usual and Amara had not known what to do with the extra 20 minutes of quiet. "I like to get oriented before the shift begins," she said. He looked at her in that way he had, not unkind, but very direct, the way people look when they have stopped performing interest and are simply interested. "You speak with an accent," he said. "French." "Partially. My mother is from Lagos. My father was from Lyon. I grew up between them." She adjusted the strap of her bag. "My French is better than my Yoruba, but Nia is determined to change that." Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile. Something adjacent to one. "She told me she sings in Yoruba." "She told you a great deal," Amara said, and there was an edge in it, not quite embarrassment, not quite warmth. "She did," he agreed. "She also told me you used to own a company." The edge became something else. She was quiet for a moment, long enough that it registered. "A lifetime ago," she said. "Skin care. Luxury botanicals. Handmade. Small batch. We had wholesale contracts with 4 distributors in France and 1 in Belgium." She said it the way you described something that happened to someone else. Smooth on the surface. It doesn't matter now. What happened to it? The question was direct. Not cruel, just direct. The kind of question that assumes the person being asked is capable of handling it. Amara had encountered so few people who asked that way that it almost startled her. A bad partnership, she said. I trusted the wrong person. He nodded slowly, as though this confirmed something he had already considered. What was the brand called? He asked. Okafor and C. She said it quietly. We were 2 years from being profitable. He said nothing, but something happened in his eyes, a calculation, a filing away. She recognized the look. It was the look of someone whose mind was already moving 3 steps ahead of the conversation. She didn't want anyone's mind moving 3 steps ahead of her conversation. Not here. Not now. She had worked very hard to be invisible, and invisible people did not have histories that powerful men found interesting. I should start the lobby, she said. Of course. He stepped back from the photograph, allowing her through. The east side near the windows collects more dust than it appears to. The air current from the ventilation. She paused. How do you know that? I notice things in this building, he said simply. I've had a long time to notice things. She thought, walking away, that this was the saddest sentence she had heard in a long time. Said so plainly, as though he had made peace with it. The thing about Kang Min-Jae, Amara began to understand over the following days, was that his coldness was not cruelty. It was distance. There was a difference, and it was important. A cruel person enjoys the effect they have on others. A distant person has simply withdrawn somewhere private where the effect of others cannot reach them. One is a choice made from power. The other is a choice made from pain. She watched him with staff, precise, never demeaning, occasionally direct to the point of bluntness, but never humiliating. She watched him with the estate's maintenance crew, fair, remembering specific details about ongoing repairs without being prompted. She watched him with Mr. Bay, respectful in the way that recognized competence without needing to perform gratitude for it. She watched him with Nia. That was different from all of it. With Nia, the distance simply wasn't there. Whether he was aware of this, she couldn't say. He may not have been. But when Nia was in a room, something in the architecture of his face changed. Not dramatically, not in a way a stranger would necessarily clock, but Amara was not a stranger to reading the small shifts in how people held themselves when they thought no one was paying attention. She had survived on that skill. He listened to Nia the way adults rarely listen to children, without the patronizing half-attention, without the smile that says, I'm indulging you. He actually listened. He answered her questions as though they deserved real answers. When Nia told him on the 5th day that she had given names to all the plants on the garden terrace and expected him to use those names when referring to them, he did not laugh. He said, Tell me the names, and took out a small notebook and wrote them down. Amara had watched that from the corridor entrance. She had thought, this man is dangerous. Not in the way the staff whispered about him. Not dangerous in the way of someone who would hurt you. Dangerous in the way of something that, once it got into your chest, was very difficult to reason away. She had gone back to her cleaning. She had been very diligent about her cleaning for the rest of that week. On the 7th night of her employment, it rained again. Not the sheet rain of her first night. This was a slower rain, steady and determined, the kind that settles in and doesn't apologize. The garden terrace was washed clean and quiet, and the indoor corridors had a particular echo in wet weather, a resonance that made the estate feel larger and emptier than usual. Nia had fallen asleep early. Amara was on the 2nd-floor corridor, working her way methodically from east to west, when she turned a corner and nearly walked into Min-Jae. He was carrying a folder. She had a mop. Neither of them had expected the other. Sorry, she said immediately. My house, he said. I'll apologize. This was such an unexpected thing for him to say. Not the words exactly, but the tone, which was almost dry, almost the shape of humor, that she stood there for a moment without a response. Late for a walk, she said finally. I don't sleep well when it rains. Why not? He looked at the question as though deciding whether to answer it genuinely. Quiet houses get louder in the rain, he said. The sound fills the space. Makes you aware of how much space there is. She understood that immediately and completely, In the way you understand something that has happened to you without knowing there was a name for it. She had lain in the small apartment in the weeks before Busan, listening to rain against a single window, aware of all the silence that pressed in from every wall. "I know what you mean," she said. He looked at her. "Where did you live before Busan?" "A short-term place in Seoul. Before that, Incheon. Before that, Paris." She said it without elaboration, the geography of someone running a very long distance. "And before Paris, Marseille." She adjusted her grip on the mop. "Where the company was." He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone with nothing to say. The silence of someone deciding how much to say. "Okafor and C," he said. She stiffened. "You looked it up." "I'm a businessman," he said, without apology. "When I hear something that doesn't add up, I look it up." "I'm a cleaning woman," she said evenly. "There's nothing that doesn't add up." "There is." He didn't say it aggressively. Just factually. The company filed for insolvency under circumstances that didn't match its financial trajectory. 2 years from profitable, you said. The filings agree. The collapse was sudden. The ownership transfer before the filing was unusual. Amara said nothing. "The name on the transfer," he said, "was CO." The rain outside pressed against the windows. Amara stood in the corridor of a house she cleaned for a living and felt the floor do something strange beneath her feet. Not literally, but in the way the world sometimes reconfigures itself so quickly that your body takes a moment to catch up. "That's a common Korean surname," she said, because she had to say something. "It is," he agreed. But the company it transferred to was a subsidiary of CO Political Holdings, registered in France under a subsidiary name. He paused. "I spent 40 minutes on this." "Then you know as much as I do," she said. Her voice was very controlled. She had worked very hard on that voice for a very long time. "I know what the documents say," he said. "I'd like to know what happened." She looked at him for a long moment. This man in his midnight corridor, standing in the rain-heavy silence of his enormous quiet house, holding a folder he hadn't opened and asking her a question she had not answered for anyone in 18 months. "I had a business partner," she said at last. "French-Korean. We met through a trade network in Lyon. She invested, I built. For 2 years, we were building something real." She pressed her back against the corridor wall and looked at the ceiling because it was easier than looking at him. "I was in Lagos with Nia visiting my mother when the documents were filed. I came back to France to find my name removed from the ownership, the company in insolvency proceedings, and a restraining order application suggesting I had committed fraud." She let out a breath. "The application was dismissed. But the company was gone. My reputation was gone. And my partner had returned to Korea." The silence that followed was a different quality from the silences that had come before in that house. It was not the silence of a room that was simply empty. It was the silence of two people in the same space, both understanding something at the same time. "The partner," Min-Jae said. His voice was very careful. "Her name." Amara looked at him. She had not thought, when she walked into this estate to clean its floors, that she would ever say the name to anyone here. She had chosen Busan precisely because it was large and lateral and full of people who did not know each other's business. She had not thought the name would come up in a corridor at midnight with rain against the windows. "Co Rin Ah," she said. The folder in Min-Jae's hand didn't move. His face didn't move. But something in the air between them changed so completely and so quickly that Amara felt it before she understood it, the way you feel weather before you see it. "I see," he said. He said nothing else. He walked past her down the corridor, quietly, without hurry. Amara stood alone in the second-floor hallway and listened to the rain and understood, with the particular clarity that comes from having nothing left to lose, that she had just detonated something she had no control over. She didn't know yet how right she was. Co Rin Ah arrived at Daesung Hill residence on the 9th day. She came in the way people come when they are accustomed to arriving, as though the space had been waiting for them and was relieved by their presence. A black car. Luggage handled by staff immediately. The particular kind of entrance that requires no announcement because the preparation has already been done by other people. She was exactly as beautiful as Amara remembered. That was always the first thing you thought, because it was designed to be. Rin-Ah was the kind of woman who had been crafted into a weapon of impression, everything precisely placed, nothing accidental. She wore beauty like a policy. Amara saw her from the east corridor, through a gap in the decorative partition near the lobby. She saw the arrival. She saw Mr. Bay's carefully neutral welcome. She saw the practiced way Rin-Ah moved through a space, touching surfaces briefly, as though assessing what she owned. Then Rin-Ah's eyes moved across the lobby in that idle proprietary way. And stopped. She had seen Amara through the partition gap. Their eyes connected through the carved wooden screen with the precision of two people who have never needed an introduction because their shared history is its own language. Rin-Ah smiled. It was a beautiful smile. It was also a chess move. Amara turned and walked in the other direction. She walked to the laundry room and stood inside it with the door closed and her hands flat on the folding table and breathed in the clean smell of warm linen and told herself, firmly, practically, without sentiment, that this changed nothing. She had survived Marseille. She had survived the legal proceedings and the financial collapse and the move and the loneliness and the slow reconstruction. She had survived all of that. She was still here. Nia was still here. This was just another thing to survive. She told herself that for 4 minutes. Then she straightened her uniform, opened the door, and went back to work. The corridor confrontation happened that same night, at 11:30, near the service stairs. Amara was heading down to the supply room. Rin-Ah was coming from wherever she had been. They met in the narrow space between the stairwell door and the wall, where there was not quite room for two people to pass without acknowledging each other. Rin-Ah stopped. "Amara," she said, as though they were running into each other at a lunch they had both been looking forward to. Her Korean accent had become more pronounced, Amara noticed. Everything about her had been refined, polished, adjusted for her current role. "Miss Seo," Amara said. "It's strange to see you here," Rin-Ah said. She tilted her head slightly. "Though you always were resourceful." A pause. "Still surviving." The words were designed to land a specific way. Amara had had years of experience with words designed to land specific ways. She let them arrive and she did not flinch. "Working," Amara said. "There's a difference." Something flickered in Rin-Ah's eyes. "Not quite respect. The thing that comes before respect, when someone has surprised you." "Of course," she said smoothly. "Well, it's a large estate. I'm sure we can both occupy it without difficulty," Amara said. Rin-Ah smiled again. The chess move smile. "I was going to say without inconveniencing each other." "I'm staff," Amara said. "I don't inconvenience anyone. That's the point." She moved past her. She was 3 steps down the stairs when Rin-Ah said, softly, "Know your place in this house, Amara." Amara stopped. She stood on the stairwell with her hand on the metal railing and breathed once, slowly, the way you breathe when the alternative is doing something you cannot take back. Then she went down the stairs. She did not know that Min-Jae had been at the top of the corridor, returning from his study, far enough back that neither woman had seen him. She did not know that he had heard the last 30 seconds of the conversation clearly. She did not know what his face looked like in those 30 seconds, because she was not there to see it. She would understand later, though. She would understand from what followed. Because what followed was this. Min-Jae went into his study and made 3 phone calls. She didn't know about those either. She knew about none of the things that began moving quietly and purposefully in the background of her life during those next days, set in motion by a man who had spent years observing everything in his building and had just begun to use that capacity for something other than business. In the estate security office, on a server that very few people had authorization to access, a discreet digital request was filed to retrieve archived financial records from a French commercial court. The request came through a legal firm in Seoul. The firm was connected, through 3 layers of corporate structure, to Myri Holdings. Min-Jae sat with those records for 2 nights. He sat with them the way he sat with all problems that mattered, alone, methodical, without hurry. The lamp on his desk made a small warm circle in the large dark library, and he worked inside that circle and did not stop until the shape of what had happened was clear to him. It was very clear. The ownership transfer had been executed while Amara was out of the country. The authorization signature, hers, ostensibly, had been filed with a notarization from an office that had since been dissolved. The insolvency proceedings had been triggered 72 hours after the transfer, before Amara had returned to France and before she could contest anything. The fraud allegation had come from within the new ownership structure. It was neat. It was efficient. It was the work of someone who had done this before or had access to someone who had, and who understood that the law, at the speed it moved, could be used as a weapon by whoever got there first. Min-Jae set the last page down. He thought of Amara in the corridor, saying a person's situation is not their value, in a tone that said she was reminding herself as much as stating a fact. He thought of Nia in the garden, naming flowers and speaking French to them, and drawing pictures of a family that didn't exist yet with the absolute faith of someone who had not yet learned that some things you draw don't come true. He thought of quiet houses. Loud rain. He thought, enough. He picked up his phone. On the 11th day, Amara broke. It happened the way these things usually happen, not all at once and not from the biggest thing, but from the accumulation of small things pressing on a structure that has been holding far longer than it was built to hold. It was raining again. It was always raining in Busan when something mattered. She had finished her shift. Nia was asleep in the small staff room that Madame Moon had quietly arranged for them to use on late nights, and Amara was sitting in the garden terrace alone because she needed air, and the garden was the only place in the estate that felt, in some intangible way, like it had been waiting for someone to simply sit in it without purpose. She sat on the low bench and looked at the plants, at Marguerite and the tall one Nia had named Sebastian, and the sprawling one in the corner she had named after a cartoon character Amara couldn't remember, and she thought about Marseille. She thought about the morning she had come back from Lagos to find the locks changed on the office. She thought about sitting outside that locked door in the rain, calling Rin-Os number, hearing it ring and ring. She thought about explaining to a 4-year-old, who had just spent 3 weeks with her grandmother and arrived back in France expecting the apartment and the routine and the small version of stability they had built, that they were going to have to move. Again. She thought about the expression on Nia's face in that moment, not crying, not frightened. Just watching her mother with those enormous steady eyes, waiting, because Nia had understood from very early that her mother was the thing that held, and if her mother was still there, then things could still be okay. The weight of being someone's whole horizon. She hadn't cried about it yet. Not once. Not through the legal proceedings, not through the move, not through the months of applications and rejections and the slow, terrible shrinking of her world. She cried now. Quietly, without drama, sitting alone in the garden of a house she cleaned for a living, in the rain. The way you cry when there's no one to perform for, which is the realest kind of crying there is. She didn't hear the door. Amara. She turned. Min-Jae stood in the doorway of the garden terrace. Not in his suit. He was in a dark sweater and trousers, which was the closest to casual she had ever seen him. He was holding a cup of something hot. He looked at her face, and his expression did something complicated. "I didn't know anyone else was," she started, turning away to recover herself quickly. "Stay," he said. It was not a command. It was something quieter than that. He came and sat on the bench, not close enough to crowd her, not far enough to suggest he was avoiding her. He set the second cup down beside her. Tea, she realized. He had brought 2. She looked at the cup. She didn't say anything. "Tell me," he said. "You already know," she said. Her voice was rough at the edges. "I know what the documents say," he said. "That's not the same thing." And so she told him. Not the facts, he had the facts, but the rest of it. The thing that happened to you when someone takes something you built with your own hands and burns it while you're not looking. The particular shame of it, not just the loss but the way the loss was made to look like your fault, so that even the people who believed in you had a question mark behind their eyes when they looked at you. The way you start to wonder if the question mark is right. The way that wondering is the worst part. The way you keep building anyway because stopping is not something you've ever learned to do, but the building feels different now, smaller and more careful, like building with one hand while the other covers your chest. She talked for a long time. He listened the way he always listened, actually, completely without interruption. When she finished, the rain was lighter. Not gone, but softer. He said, "Your situation changed. Your value didn't." She turned to look at him. He said it plainly. "No performance in it. The way you say something that is simply true." "You're quoting my daughter," she said. "She's right," he said. They sat in the garden with their cups of tea while the rain became something gentle, and neither of them said anything for a while, and the silence was not the heavy, empty silence of a house with no one in it. It was a different kind entirely. Nia found the drawing 3 days later, at the bottom of her pencil box, a piece of estate notepaper, folded twice, with a small note in Min-Jae's precise handwriting. "Thank you for naming the plants. Marguerite is looking particularly well today. MJ." Nia read this with enormous seriousness. Then she got out her best pencil and spent 40 minutes on a reply. She drew all 3 of them, herself, her mother, Min-Jae, in the garden. She drew it carefully. She drew the flowers by name. At the bottom, pressing hard with the crayon, she wrote one word: home. She put it in an envelope she found in the art box and wrote Min-Jae on the front in letters so large they barely fit. She left it outside the library door. When Min-Jae found it that evening and unfolded it, he stood in his library doorway for a long moment. Then he went inside, sat at his desk, and placed it in the top drawer. Not in a file. Not in a stack. In the top drawer, alone, where he would see it every morning. He had not put anything in that drawer for years. This is where they were when Seo Rin-Ah's family arrived for the dinner. This is the precise emotional geography: the tea in the rain, the drawing in the drawer, the plants with their names, the conversations in midnight corridors, that sat inside the estate's walls when 47 powerful people took their seats at the long table and crystal glasses caught the chandelier light and everything felt controlled and safe and arranged exactly as planned. Until the door opened. Until Nia walked in, shoes slightly too big, drawing pressed against her chest, with somewhere to be and the absolute certainty of someone who has never learned to be afraid of the rooms that matter most. And the story, which had been building quietly for 3 weeks in corridors and gardens and rainy silences, arrived at the moment it had been moving toward all along. Min-Jae held the drawing. He looked at it for a long time. The room around him had 47 people in it. He was aware of none of them. Rin-Ah said, from beside him, in a tone calibrated to be heard only at the table, "Min-Jae, this is obviously a misunderstanding. The child belongs to the cleaning staff and she should be removed before." "Her name is Nia," Min-Jae said. Not loudly. He never needed volume. But the way he said it, each word precise and final, the way he closed a negotiation, made Rin-Ah go completely still. Nia, who had been watching the exchange with great interest, tugged on Min-Jae's sleeve. "Is she mad?" Nia whispered, looking at Rin-Ah. Nia's whisper was not, had never been, an actual whisper. Someone at the far end of the table heard it. Pressed their lips together to suppress something. "Nia!" Amara's voice came from across the room, urgent, tight, terrified. But Min-Jae had already crouched down to Nia's level. He looked at her with the expression that only ever appeared on his face in her presence, the thing that was not quite a smile but lived in the same neighborhood. "You made this yourself," he said, holding up the drawing. 3 days, Nia confirmed seriously. "I did Min-Jae's hair 3 times because I kept making it too fluffy." "You don't have fluffy hair." "I appreciate the accuracy," he said. "Do you like it?" He looked at the drawing. At the 3 figures holding hands. At the word at the bottom in a child's pressed crayon. "Very much," he said. He straightened up. He turned to face the table. The room recalibrated itself instantly. That particular recalibration that happens in rooms full of powerful people when the most powerful person in the room makes a decision that has not been negotiated in advance. People who had been leaning toward each other leaned back. People who had been about to speak closed their mouths. Rin-Ah's father, seated 3 places down, folded his hands on the table. "I need to say something," Min-Jae said, addressing no one specifically and therefore everyone. "That has been delayed long enough." Rin-Ah said, very quietly, "Min-Jae." "Rin-Ah." His voice was not cruel. It was simply closed. The way a door is closed, not violently, but with finality, with a particular click that means it will not open again from the outside. There are people in this room who know what happened in Marseille. And there are people in this room who are going to know by the end of tonight. The silence that followed was so total that when Nia reached up and put her hand in Min-Jae's, the small sound of it was audible. He looked down at her hand. He didn't let go of it. "Approximately 18 months ago," he said, in the voice he used when presenting to shareholders, measured, certain, with the weight of prepared evidence behind every word, A company called Okafor & C, registered in Marseille, was transferred out of its founder's ownership through a fraudulently notarized document filed while that founder was out of the country. The transfer went to a subsidiary connected to CO Political Holdings. Insolvency proceedings followed within 72 hours. A fraud allegation was filed from within the new ownership structure, allegation later dismissed, but not before the reputational damage was done. Rin Os father's hands, still folded on the table, had gone white at the knuckles. I have been in contact with a prosecutor's office in Lyon for 6 days, Min-Jae continued. The documentation is with them. The notarization has been traced. The timeline has been established. He looked directly at the man across the table. This is not a threat. This is information being shared with the people in this room who have made decisions about their associations based on an incomplete picture. Rin-Ah stood up. You cannot do this, she said. Her composure was cracking at the edges, not gone, but strained, the way beautiful things crack under pressure. Everything you think you know is... I know what I read, Min-Jae said. And I know what I saw in this hallway 11 days ago. The room went completely silent. From the east side of the room, behind the serving station, Amara stood with her hands pressed flat against the wall behind her because she needed something solid. She was shaking. Not with fear, or not only with fear, but with a particular physical response to watching something you stopped believing was possible actually happen in front of you. Min-Jae looked across the room and found her eyes. He held them for a moment. Then he looked down at Nia, who was still holding his hand, who had been watching the entire exchange with the profound, unblinking attention of someone witnessing a very interesting event whose full significance she would understand later. The engagement, Min-Jae said, returning his attention to the table, is ended. Rin-Ah's composure broke entirely then. She said something, sharp, low, in rapid Korean, but it dissolved into the eruption of noise that followed because the room could no longer hold its collective silence. Chairs scraped. Voices overlapped. Rin-Ah's father was on his feet. The man to Min-Jae's left was already on his phone. 2 of the political wives were leaning together in rapid murmured conference. Min-Jae stood in the center of all of it, completely still. Nia, at his side, looked up at him. She had to tug his hand twice to get his attention. Are you okay? She asked. He looked down at her. Yes, he said. And something about it, the word, the way he said it, was true in a way that surprised even him. Good, she said. Can I have more strawberries? Something broke open in his face then. Not the careful adjacent to a smile thing. Something real and full and unexpected, the kind that happens to faces when they've forgotten they could make it. He laughed. In the middle of the chaos, in the wreckage of the most politically significant dinner the estate had hosted in years, Kang Min-Jae laughed, short, real, startled out of him by a 4-year-old asking about strawberries, and it was possibly the most disorienting thing anyone in that room had ever witnessed. From across the room, Amara pressed her hand over her mouth. He had carried Nia around the long table, through the noise, through the controlled collapse of a political alliance and a society engagement, to where Amara stood against the east wall. Nia held both his neck and her mother's sleeves simultaneously in a grip that suggested she was not planning to let go of either of them soon. Amara looked at him. She didn't know what to say. She had been composing what to say to him since he had said Rin-Ah's name in the second-floor corridor 11 days ago, and now that the moment was here, every version she had practiced dissolved. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know, he said. You've just... She looked at the room behind him. You've turned your entire world upside down. It needed turning, he said simply. She looked at him for a long time. He looked back. The room behind him continued its organized chaos. Mr. Bay had appeared at some point and was managing the situation with the particular competence of someone who has seen difficult things and developed a system, but neither of them was in that room anymore, not really. Nia patted both their faces simultaneously with her small hands. Stop looking at each other like that, she said with great authority. Just hold hands. It's easier. Min-Jae looked at Nia. Amara looked at Nia. Then Amara looked at Min-Jae, and there was a helplessness in her expression and a warmth in it that she had stopped pretending wasn't there about 6 days ago when she'd made peace with the fact that pretending wasn't working. Min-Jae held out his hand. She looked at it. She took it. Nia, satisfied, settled back against Min-Jae's shoulder and yawned enormously. "Good," she said. "Now nobody has to be lonely anymore." The weeks that followed moved differently. There is a specific quality of time in the period after a storm, when the sky has cleared and the ground is still wet and everything smells like rain and beginnings. Things that were damaged get assessed. Things that can be repaired are repaired. Some things that seemed permanent are found to have been held together by something much thinner than believed, and when that thing breaks, they simply go. Rin-Ah left the estate the following morning. Quietly, without ceremony. Her father's car came at 7 a.m. and she walked to it without looking at the building, and that was all. The Lion prosecutor's office filed formal proceedings 4 weeks later. The process of restoring Amara's ownership rights was not fast. It was a legal process, and legal processes are by nature neither fast nor merciful, but Min-Jae had retained counsel. Within the week, and the counsel he retained was the kind that moved things that had appeared immovable. Amara was involved in every step, by her insistence and his respect for that insistence. She was not a passenger in her own restoration. She had opinions about strategy, about documentation, about the order of precedence in the filing. The lawyers, initially surprised by the specificity of her knowledge, stopped being surprised quickly. She had built the company once. She knew where every corner of it was. She was no longer cleaning floors. This had happened quietly. Madame Un had known before Amara did, Mr. Bay had suspected, and the estate staff had taken the adjustment in stride with a particular pragmatic grace of people who work close to power and have long since stopped being surprised by its movements. Amara was given a room in the residential wing, which she shared with Nia, and which Nia immediately began decorating with drawings taped at child height along the lower portion of the wall. Min-Jae had not asked her to stay. He had simply made staying possible and then said nothing, which was, she had come to understand, precisely how he communicated the things that mattered most. Through action and through space. Through drawing materials and unlocked gardens and 2 cups of tea in the rain. She stayed. She wasn't entirely sure when she decided this, or whether it had been a decision exactly. Whether it had been more like the way water decides to stay in a particular low place, not through choice but through finding the place that holds. She worked on the company reconstruction from the estate's library, his library, the one with the 2-floor bookshelves and the rolling ladder and the particular lamplight that made everything feel like it was happening inside something warm. She worked at the desk in the corner, and he worked at the large desk across from her, and they did not talk during working hours except when necessary, but there was something in the shared silence that was entirely different from any silence the room had previously held. One afternoon she looked up and found him watching her. Not the way men look at women when they want something. The way people look at things they are still learning to believe exist. "What?" she said. "You've been working for 4 hours," he said. "You haven't moved." "I'm aware. It's past 6. She looked at the window. The light outside was the warm orange-pink of early evening. She had not noticed. "Nia is in the garden," she said, starting to rise. "She's been fed," he said. "Madame Un. She's drawing Sebastian. The plant." Nia had named a plant Sebastian. Amara sat back down. "Right," she said. "You don't have to account for every minute," he said. "You're allowed to work." "I know I'm allowed," she said. But something in the way she said it acknowledged what he was actually saying, that she was allowed to work without apology, without bracing for it to be taken from her, without that particular muscle tension of someone who has learned that good things are temporary and should be held loosely. She was still learning to stop bracing. "It's going to take time," he said. "Not about the company." "I know," she said. "Not about the company." They went back to their respective work. Outside in the garden, Nia had finished drawing Sebastian and moved on to a new drawing. She worked with great concentration, head bowed, tongue just visible at the corner of her mouth, the way it always was when she was creating something she considered important. She was drawing the house. Not the estate, not the grand exterior with the pillars and the long driveway and the ornamental hedges. She was drawing the inside. The library with the big bookshelves. The garden terrace with its named plants. The kitchen corridor where Madame Un always had something warm. The room she and her mother shared with the drawings along the lower wall. She drew it full of light and full of people and full of the particular small details that make a place a home rather than a building. A cup of tea on a windowsill, a rabbit on a bed, flowers in the window boxes. She sat back and looked at it. She added one more thing. At the center of the drawing, inside the library with its warm circle of lamplight, she drew 2 people at their desks and a door left open to the garden. She wrote home again at the bottom. She had written it on drawings before. She would write it again. She was not tired of writing it. She had been drawing the same home for 3 weeks now, with slight variations. She was beginning to believe it was the same home she was actually in. Children are often right about these things. The evening that the restoration documentation cleared its first major legal hurdle was a Thursday in early winter. The Busan light had gone silver and low, the way it did when the season turned, and the garden was past its main bloom but still holding small stubborn flowers in the corners. Amara had been on a call with the Lion Council for 2 hours. When it ended, she sat quietly for a moment, phone in her hand, and then put her head down on the library desk and breathed. Not the way she'd breathed in the laundry room the night Rin arrived. Not to survive, not to get through. Just breathed. When she lifted her head, Min-Jae was in the doorway. "The first filing cleared," she said. "I know," he said. "The council contacted me as well. As a courtesy. They thought I should know." She turned in her chair to look at him. "You've been very involved in this." "It was my investigation that surfaced the evidence," he said, which was both true and not what she had meant. "I know," she said. "I mean," she stopped. "Tried again. You didn't have to continue being involved after the dinner." "After?" She gestured vaguely, meaning, after everything, after the chaos, after you blew up your own engagement and your own dinner and your own very carefully arranged life for a woman and a child you had known for 11 days. "No," he agreed. "So why?" "Amara," he said. She stopped. He came fully into the room, not to the desk but to the window, standing with his back to the silver evening light. He looked at her with a directness that she had once found disconcerting and now found something else. The thing that lived next to comfort but was warmer. "I spent a long time in this house," he said, "being very careful about not wanting things." He paused. "It's an efficient way to live. Nothing disappoints you. Nothing disrupts you." He looked at the garden through the window. "Then a 4-year-old walked into my library and told me my house was lonely and fell asleep on my shirt, and I realized I had been very foolish for a very long time." Amara was quiet. "I'm not good at this," he said. "I want to be honest about that. I am not practiced at any of this. I had resigned myself to a life that didn't require practice." "You're better at it than you think," she said. He looked at her. "The tea in the rain," she said. "The drawing in the drawer. The plants." She paused. "You wrote back to her letter." "She named the plants," he said. "It seemed only courteous." The corner of Amara's mouth moved. "You laughed," she said. "At the dinner. In the middle of all of that." She asked about strawberries. "I know." The corner of her mouth became something fuller. "It was the first time I'd ever seen you laugh like that." He looked at her with the expression that was only ever present in this room, in this lamplight, in the particular atmosphere that had developed between the 2 large desks where they worked in shared silence. "It won't be the last," he said. She held that. Let it settle. Let herself believe it. From the garden came the sound of Nia singing, the long Yoruba song, the one Amara only usually sang when she thought Nia was asleep. Nia had clearly learned it and was performing it to the plants at considerable volume, with enthusiasm that more than compensated for technical imprecision. They both looked toward the garden. "She's been teaching herself," Amara said. "I know," Min-Jae said. "She's been using me as an audience. She made me sit in the garden last Tuesday for 40 minutes while she practiced." "She did not tell me this. I think she was workshopping the performance before the premiere." Amara pressed her lips together. Failed to suppress the sound that came out anyway, real and sudden and warm. Min-Jae looked at her when it happened with the look of someone who has just received something they didn't know they needed. "Maman." Nia's voice floated in from the garden. "Come and hear my song. I added a new part." "Min-Jae, you already heard it. You have to pretend it's new." Amara shook her head. She looked at Min-Jae. He raised both eyebrows slightly, a gesture that meant, unmistakably, "After you." She pushed back her chair and walked to the garden door. She pushed it open. The evening air was cold and clean and smelled of the last stubborn flowers and the stone tiles after rain. Nia stood in the center of the terrace with her arms spread wide in the performance posture she always assumed when she was about to sing something she was proud of. Her yellow dress, a newer one, slightly less worn than the first, caught the last of the evening light. She saw her mother in the doorway and beamed. She saw Min-Jae appear behind her mother and beamed wider. "Ready," she said. "Ready," Amara said. She began to sing. She had added a new part. It was, truthfully, somewhat improvised and metrically adventurous and bore limited relationship to the original structure of the song. She sang it with a complete, unself-conscious commitment of someone who has never once considered the possibility that her performance might be anything other than wonderful. Amara stood in the doorway of the library that had become her workplace, in the estate that had become her home, in the city that had begun as an escape and was becoming something else, and listened to her daughter sing a Yoruba song to a garden full of plants with French names. Beside her, Min-Jae was quiet. She looked at him. He was watching Nia with the expression that was no longer adjacent to a smile. It was the thing itself, full and unguarded and unbothered by being seen. She had done this to him, she realized. Or Nia had. Or the combination of the two of them, arriving in his corridors and his library and his garden and his careful, defended life and simply, refusing to leave it empty. She put her hand in his. Not because Nia told her to this time. Because she wanted to. His hand closed around hers. The song continued, joyful and slightly chaotic, Nia conducting herself with one hand. The garden lights came on automatically as the evening darkened, small warm lights strung along the terrace wall, steady and unhurried, illuminating the named flowers and the stone tiles and the small figure singing in the center of it all. And somewhere in the space between the library and the garden, between the woman who had stopped bracing and the man who had stopped being carefully without wants, and the child who had known before either of them did that this was exactly where they were supposed to be. The house, for the first time in a very long time, felt full. Not full of noise. Not full of performance or pretense or the particular crowded loneliness of powerful people in important rooms. Full of the right things. Laughter. Like a child's song. The quiet understanding between two people who have both survived enough to know that this specific ordinary extraordinary warmth, is worth more than anything either of them has ever possessed. Nia finished her song. She took a bow. She looked up at both of them, at their joined hands, with the expression of someone who has accomplished exactly what they set out to accomplish. "Good," she said. "Just that. Good." And it was. The days after the garden song settled into the estate the way good things sometimes do, not with fanfare, not with ceremony, but quietly, the way light settles into a room when someone finally opens the curtains after a long time of keeping them closed. It didn't announce itself. It simply was. And the people inside it moved differently because of it, the way people move when the air around them has changed and they haven't yet found the words for why they feel lighter. Nia noticed first, because Nia always noticed first. She noticed it in the way Madame Un hummed while she arranged the breakfast trays. She noticed it in the way Mr. Bay, who had never in living memory been observed doing anything resembling a leisurely activity, stood at the east corridor window for 3 full minutes one morning watching the garden without his clipboard. She noticed it in the way the estate staff moved, with a looseness that had not been there before, as though the building itself had exhaled and given everyone inside it a little more room. She catalogued all of this with great satisfaction and said nothing about it to anyone, because Nia had learned early that some observations were best kept like seeds, held quietly, given time, trusted to grow into something on their own. She did, however, rearrange the drawings on the lower wall of the room she shared with her mother. She added new ones. The garden, again, but fuller this time, more flowers, more light, more figures. The library with its 2 desks and its warm lamp. Madame Un in the kitchen doorway, wide and warm and holding a spoon. Mr. Bay at the window, which Nia captured in a drawing of such surprising emotional accuracy that when Amara saw it she stood in front of it for a long moment without speaking. The room was becoming a gallery. A record of something being built. Amara watched it accumulate and felt, every time she looked at it, the particular terror and gratitude of someone who has been handed something breakable and beautiful and is only just beginning to trust their own hands. She worked. That was the constant, the through line, the thing that remained true regardless of what else was shifting around it. She worked with the focused intensity of someone reclaiming something that had been taken, which is a different quality of focus from someone simply building something new. There is a particular fire in restoration. It knows what it is working toward because it has already been there. The Lion Council, a precise woman named Maitre Fontaine, who spoke in sentences so structured they could have been filed as legal documents themselves, had been cautiously optimistic since the first filing cleared. Cautiously was the operative word. She deployed it with discipline, the way someone deploys a limited resource, understanding that optimism given too freely becomes a liability in legal proceedings. But the documentation was strong. Min-Jae's initial investigation had surfaced things that Amara's own lawyer in Marseille, a tired man working with limited resources and someone else's urgency, had not had the time or connections to find. The dissolved notarization office. The timeline of the transfer. The paper trail that connected the subsidiary back through 3 shell registrations to a holding company that bore the CO name in every direction you looked, if you looked carefully enough and had access to the right databases, which Min-Jae did, because Min-Jae had spent 20 years building the kind of infrastructure that made looking carefully at things very efficient. Amara had read every page of it. She had asked questions that made Maitre Fontaine pause, and then answer with a precision that suggested she had recalibrated her assessment of the woman on the other end of the call. She had annotated her own copies. She had a system, color-coded, cross-referenced, organized with the same methodical intelligence she had applied to building the company in the first place. She was not a passenger. She had made that clear from the beginning, and she made it clear again every time the opportunity arose, not aggressively but with a quiet, consistent insistence that had eventually stopped needing to be stated at all, because everyone involved had understood it. Min-Jae understood it. He had understood it, she thought, before she had needed to say it even once. That was one of the things about him. He paid attention in the way that made saying things unnecessary, not because he presumed to know what you meant before you said it, but because he had already observed enough to understand the shape of you, and the shape of you told him most of what he needed to know. It was, she had decided, the most intimate quality a person could possess. More intimate than touch. More intimate than words. The quality of being truly seen by someone who is looking not to confirm what they already believe but simply to understand what is actually there. She was still getting used to it. She was still getting used to a great many things. The morning routine had evolved without being designed. Nia woke first. She always woke first, with the absolute energy of someone who had charged fully overnight and was prepared to deploy that charge immediately and without warning, and she would appear in the main room of their suite with Biscuit the rabbit under one arm and some specific agenda already in motion. Some mornings the agenda was drawing-related. Some mornings it was question-related, which meant a series of inquiries on topics she had apparently been considering during the night and was now prepared to pursue with journalistic determination. Some mornings the agenda was Min-Jae-related, which meant locating him before breakfast and updating him on whatever development she considered most significant since their last conversation. Amara had given up trying to intercept these visits. She had tried, in the early days of the new arrangement, had attempted to install some reasonable buffer between her 4-year-old and the man whose house they lived in, had suggested to Nia that perhaps Min-Jae had things to do in the morning and might not always be available for conversation. Nia had considered this with the seriousness she brought to all feedback, and then had said, "But he's always there when I knock," which was both true and completely unanswerable, and that had been the end of that particular conversation. He was, in fact, always there. Amara didn't know when he slept. He seemed to operate on a schedule that existed outside normal human parameters. She had come down to the library at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday and found him already at his desk, coffee at his elbow, reading a document with the concentration of someone mid-thought, looking for all the world as though he had been there for hours, which he probably had. She had started bringing 2 cups from the kitchen when she came down early. He had stopped pretending to be surprised by this after the 3rd time. These were the textures of the life that was assembling itself around them. Not the dramatic moments, not the chandelier dinner or the corridor at midnight or the drawing unfolded with almost gentle hands. The small things, the cups of coffee, the morning reports from Nia, the shared working silence that had developed its own grammar, its own internal language of glances and pauses, and the particular way he looked up from his desk when she said something he found interesting, which was not a look she had seen him give anything else. She was building a life. Again. In a different place, from different materials, with an entirely different blueprint than she had imagined. It was not the life she had been building in Marseille. It was not the life she had dreamed in Lagos as a young woman, or in Lion as a young entrepreneur, or in any of the versions of the future she had constructed and then watched come apart. It was not a life she could have drawn from memory because she had never seen it before. It was new. Entirely new. She was finding, to her cautious, defended, slowly relaxing astonishment, that new was not the frightening thing she had trained herself to believe it was. It was the 14th morning after the dinner when the first thing arrived. A letter. Not a legal document. Those came through Maitre Fontaine and arrived as notifications on her phone before the physical copies appeared. This was a letter in a cream envelope, handwritten address, Korean postmark. It had been left on the small table near the staff entrance, where the drawing materials and the strawberries had appeared on that first morning, where it had all, in some essential way, begun. Madame Un found it first and brought it to Amara with the careful expression of someone delivering something they can't assess and therefore won't comment on. Amara turned it over. No return address. Her name on the front, spelled correctly, in handwriting she did not recognize. She opened it at the library desk while Min-Jae was in a meeting in the East Wing and Nia was in the garden conducting what appeared to be a naming ceremony for a new plant that had come up in the corner planter. The letter was short. 8 sentences. She read it twice, carefully, and then set it down and looked out the window at the garden where Nia was crouched over the new plant with an expression of solemn administrative authority. She read it a third time. The signature at the bottom was a name she didn't know. A woman's name. Korean. Below the name, a title, personal secretary, and below that, the name of an organization she recognized immediately, because it was the kind of name you recognized once you had been inside the world that had taken everything from her. CO Political Holdings. The letter was not threatening. That was what made it careful. It was not a threat because it didn't need to be. It was an inquiry. Elegantly phrased. Precisely structured. It asked, in the smooth language of people who have never needed to be direct because directness is for people with fewer options, whether Amara might be available for a conversation. A private one. At a location of her choosing. To discuss, as the letter put it, mutual interests and the possibility of a resolution that served everyone involved. Mutual interests. Amara folded the letter. She put it in the top drawer of the desk she worked at. Not the same drawer where Min-Jae kept Nia's drawing. A different one. She closed the drawer. She went back to her work and she did not mention the letter that day or the following day, and she told herself this was because she was still deciding what to do with it, which was true. She told herself it was because she wanted to think it through clearly before involving anyone else, which was also true. She did not examine, very carefully, the third reason. The one that lived underneath the other two and was quieter and more complicated. The one that sounded like, you have let someone. You have let someone stand between you and the thing that is coming for you, and you are not yet certain you know how to do that without losing yourself in the doing. She had rebuilt herself from nothing twice. The first time had been after her father died, when the world had contracted to just her mother and a small apartment in Lagos and the absolute necessity of becoming someone who could hold things together. The second time had been after Marseille, after Rin Ah, after the locked office and the legal proceedings and the long cold geography of running. Both times she had done it alone. That was not a complaint. It was simply the fact of it. She had learned that she was someone who could do it alone. That she was, in the deepest part of herself, capable of being her own foundation. And that knowledge, the absolute, tested certainty of her own capacity, was the thing she had carried through every version of her life. It was the one thing no one had been able to take from her. She was afraid, in a way she hadn't admitted yet, that needing someone else might cost her that certainty. That if she leaned, and the thing she leaned on moved, she would not know how to be upright again. She knew this fear was not rational. She knew it was the fear of a person who had been hurt in a specific way and had built very specific armor around that hurt. She knew that Min-Jae was not Rin Ah, had never been anything like Rin Ah, was in fact almost her photographic negative in every quality that had made Rin Ah dangerous. She knew all of this. She kept the letter in the drawer anyway. Nia named the new plant Olivier and announced this at dinner with the gravity of someone filing official paperwork. Min-Jae received this information without expression, which was his way of being delighted, and wrote Olivier in his small notebook under the existing plant names. Amara watched him do this and felt the thing in her chest that she was still finding names for, the specific warmth of watching someone treat the things your child loves with the same seriousness the child brings to them. It was not a small thing. She was not sure most people understood how large a thing it actually was. She ate her dinner and she laughed at something Nia said about Olivier's personality. She had already decided he was very distinguished and somewhat formal, and she was, in the specific gold-lit space of that meal, genuinely happy. She let herself be happy. She did not take the letter out of the drawer that night. The second thing arrived 3 days later, and it was not a letter. It was a man. She saw him from the library window, a black car in the curved driveway that was not one she recognized, and from it a man in his 50s, broad-shouldered, with the specific posture of someone who has spent a long time being the person others wait for. He came alone. No driver visible, though someone must have driven. He stood in the driveway for a moment looking at the estate's facade with an expression she couldn't fully read from the window, but that contained something she recognized. The look of someone who has done a calculation and arrived at a decision and is now executing it. Mr. Bay appeared at the entrance. Whatever was exchanged was brief. The man handed something over, a card, she thought, and then returned to the car. The car left. She watched this from the window and did not move. Mr. Bay came to the library 12 minutes later. He knocked, which he did not always do, which told her something about the quality of what he was carrying. "There was a visitor," he said. "I saw," she said. He placed the card on the edge of the desk. "He said he was not here to see Mr. Kang. He was here to see you." A pause, structured as carefully as everything Mr. Bay did. "He left this and said he would return at your invitation." She looked at the card. She didn't pick it up immediately. She looked at it the way you look at something that might behave differently if you don't touch it. The name on the card was not the secretary's name. It was the name she had read in Min-Jae's summary of the financial documents. The name on the ownership transfer. Not Co. Rin-Ah. Rin-Ah had been the instrument, not the architect. The name on the card was Co. Jae-hyun. She knew the name. She had spent 18 months knowing the name with a particular intimate hatred of someone who has studied the face of the person who burned their house down. He was Rin-Ah's uncle. He was the man who had built CO Political Holdings into what it was. He was the man whose infrastructure had processed the transfer of her company with the smooth efficiency of an organization that had done this kind of thing before, that had a system for this kind of thing, that considered this kind of thing a reasonable tool in a reasonable arsenal. He had come to her door. She sat with this for a long moment. Then she picked up the card. She held it between 2 fingers, looking at the embossed letters. The quality of the card was extraordinary. Of course it was. Everything about these people was extraordinary in the way that things are extraordinary when they have never had to count the cost of anything. She set it down. She went to the other drawer. The one with the letter. She took the letter out and held it alongside the card and looked at both of them and understood, with the clear-eyed clarity of someone who has survived enough to recognize a pattern when it is presenting itself, that these were not 2 separate events. They were the first 2 movements of something coordinated. The letter first, polite, indirect, offering a door. Then the man, visible, present, real, a reminder that the door had a person on the other side of it who was prepared to stand there until it was answered. They were not threatening her. They were not stupid enough to threaten her. They were doing something more sophisticated than threatening. They were reminding her that they existed, that they were still present. That whatever was being built in the legal offices of Lion and the library of this estate, they were aware of it, and they were not simply going to wait for it to resolve without making their own moves. She put both items back in the drawer. She closed it. She went to find Nia, who was in the kitchen with Madame Un, learning to crack eggs with the intense focus of someone acquiring a technical skill. She stood in the kitchen doorway and watched her daughter receive patient instruction from a 60-year-old woman who had somehow, in the space of a few weeks, become a fixed point in their lives, a warm and constant presence that Nia had absorbed into her world with a naturalness she brought to everything she decided to love. Nia cracked an egg. It went mostly into the bowl. "Excellent," Madame Un said, with a gravity that matched the achievement. Nia looked up and saw her mother in the doorway. She smiled, full and uncomplicated, with a piece of eggshell in her hand. "Maman, I did it." Madame Un said, "I have good technique." "You have excellent technique," Amara said. She leaned against the doorframe and watched her daughter crack another egg, and she thought about the card in the drawer, and the letter in the drawer, and the way these things had arrived quiet and patient, like the first cold before a season turns. She thought about telling Min-Jae. She thought about not telling Min-Jae. She thought about what it meant that she was thinking about not telling him, and what that said about where she still was, inside herself, underneath the warmth and the garden lights and the joined hands and the morning coffee carried in 2 cups. The egg cracked. Nia cheered for herself. Amara smiled. She made her decision. She told him that night. Not at dinner, not in front of Nia. She waited until Nia was asleep and the estate had gone into its late evening quiet, the particular hush that settled over the building after 10 o'clock like a held breath. She went to the library, and he was there, of course, at the large desk with the lamp and the documents and the private industry of a man who had never learned to stop working and had, until recently, seen no reason to try. She put the letter and the card on his desk. She said nothing. She waited. He read the letter first. His face did not change while he was reading, which was not the same as nothing happening. Things happened in Min-Jae's face that were not visible in his features. They were visible in the quality of his stillness, the particular tension in his jaw, the thing that happened to his eyes when he was processing something significant. He read it twice. Then he picked up the card. He looked at the card for a moment. Then he set it down and looked at her. "How long have you had these?" he asked. The letter, 5 days. The card, today. A pause. Not a silence of judgment. She had learned to read his silences well enough to know the difference. This was the silence of someone absorbing information and recalibrating. "You didn't tell me immediately." "No," she said. He waited. "I needed to decide some things first," she said. Not about whether to tell you. I was always going to tell you. About how I was going to tell you. What it meant that I was telling you." She paused. "I'm still learning to do this. Share things before I've finished carrying them alone." He looked at her for a long time. Not with hurt. There was no performance of hurt in him, which was one of the things she valued most about him. Just with attention. Just with the quality of someone who is genuinely trying to understand. "Okay," he said. "Just that. Okay. The word that means I hear you, I see what you're saying, I'm not going to make this about me." She sat down in her chair across the desk. "Co Jae-hyun," she said. "He's the architect." Rin-ah was the face, but he was the structure behind it. Everything that happened in Marseille, the efficiency of it, the legal positioning, the pre-prepared insolvency filing, that's his pattern. He's done versions of this before. Not to me specifically. To other people. Other companies. Other founders who had something he wanted access to and didn't have the standing to acquire cleanly. Min-Jae was watching her with the focused attention he brought to things that mattered. "The distribution contracts," she said. "The wholesale relationships I had with the French and Belgian distributors. Okafor and C was 2 years from profitable, but the contracts themselves had immediate value. Access to distribution networks in Western Europe that his cosmetic subsidiary didn't have and couldn't get without an existing relationship." She folded her hands on the desk. "He didn't want my company. He wanted what my company had opened the door to. He used Rin-ah to get close enough to take the key." Min-Jae said nothing for a moment. Then, "You've known this." "I've known most of it since Marseille. I didn't have the documentation to prove it. I just knew the shape of it." She looked at the card. "He's here because the Lion proceedings have made him nervous. Because for the first time, someone with actual resources is looking at that shape with a magnifying glass." "He wants to settle," Min-Jae said. "It was not a question. He wants to make it go away before it becomes something he can't manage," she said. "He's offering a conversation, but what he's actually offering is a number. A settlement. Something that closes the case and comes with a confidentiality clause and leaves everything exactly as it was except that I'm slightly less poor and he's slightly less exposed." Min-Jae picked up the card again. He turned it over in his fingers, once. A precise, contained gesture. And nothing," she said. "I'm not taking a settlement." He looked at her. "I know what you're going to say," she said. "A settlement might be faster. It might be cleaner. It might be the practical choice." "I wasn't going to say that," he said. She stopped. "I was going to ask," he said, "what you need from me." She looked at him across the desk in the lamplight. The library was quiet around them, the books on their floor-to-ceiling shelves, the rolling ladder, the fireplace with its memory of warmth. She thought of the first night she had stood in this room's doorway and seen him kneeling on the floor refastening a sandal buckle. She thought of the word he had said when she'd apologized. "It washes. I need you to let me lead this," she said. "It has to come from me. The decision, the strategy, the direction. I know you have resources and connections that I don't have, and I'm grateful for all of it. But if I let someone else be the one who fixes this, even someone I trust, I will never fully have it back. Do you understand?" He understood. She could see that he understood before he said anything. "Yes," he said. "You can advise. You can support. You can have your legal team in contact with Maître Fontaine. But the decisions are mine. Always," he said. Simply, without caveat. She exhaled. She hadn't realized how long she'd been holding that breath. Not just tonight. 4 weeks. The particular tension of someone waiting to find out whether the person who said they wanted to stand beside her actually meant beside, or whether they meant in front of, which is a different thing entirely, and a thing she had learned to watch for. He meant beside. She had known it for a while. This was just the moment she let herself know that she knew it. "There's something else," she said. He waited. "He came here," she said. "To this address. Specifically to see me, not you. That means he knows where I am. And it means he's chosen to make his approach here rather than through the legal channels, which means he's trying to keep it informal. Keep it off the record. Keep it in the space where it's just a conversation between people who haven't filed anything yet." She paused. "If he knows I'm here, he knows about you. He knows about us. And he's calculating what that means for his exposure." Min-Jae was still. "He'll try to use it," she said. "Whatever he thinks is happening between us. He'll try to find the angle in it. Either pressure through you or—" She stopped. "Or," Min-Jae said. "Or through Nia," she said. The word landed in the room and stayed. It was not a dramatic statement. She said it factually, precisely, the way she had learned to say difficult things, looking at them directly, without flinching, because flinching took energy she couldn't afford, and because the things you refused to look at directly had a way of growing larger in the peripheral. But the quality of Min-Jae's stillness changed when she said it. Subtly. In the way the air changes before a storm, not visible, not loud, but present, pressing. "Nothing will happen to Nia," he said. His voice was level. He said it the way he said everything important, without performance, without volume, with the particular weight of someone who does not make statements they do not intend to make true. She believed him. That was the thing. She believed him without having to work at it, without having to talk herself into it, without the exhausting calculus of deciding how much faith to extend to someone and at what risk to herself. She just believed him. The way you believe in gravity, not because you've chosen to, but because the evidence is so consistent and so complete that belief and reality have become the same thing. "I know," she said. They sat with that for a moment. Then Min-Jae picked up his phone and made a call. 1 sentence, in Korean, precise. He ended it and set the phone down. "I've asked for the gate security to be updated," he said. "No unannounced visitors. Anyone coming to this address for any reason goes through the office first." He paused. "This is not me overriding your decision. This is me doing the part that is mine to do. The walls. You lead what happens inside them." She thought about the letter. The card. The man in the driveway. She thought about Nia in the kitchen, cracking eggs, cheering for herself. "Okay," she said. The weeks that followed had a different texture. Not worse, not frightening, not the way the period after Marseille had been frightening, when the fear had been the color of everything. This was more like the feeling before a storm that you have prepared for. The sandbags are down. The windows are shuttered. You have done what can be done. Now you wait, and you continue living while you wait, because not continuing to live is not an option you have ever found acceptable. Amara threw herself into the work. The documentation was growing. Maître Fontaine had connected with a specialist in international commercial fraud, a quiet, brilliant man in Brussels who had spent 20 years studying exactly the kind of layered corporate maneuver that had been deployed against Okafor and C, and who had looked at the case materials with the expression of someone recognizing a very old and familiar enemy. "This pattern," he had said, in their first call, "has a name in French legal circles. We call it the quiet transfer. It relies entirely on speed and on the absence of the founder. The window between the transfer and the insolvency filing is always very short. Too short for the rightful owner to respond. That window is the mechanism." "How many cases like this have you seen?" Amara had asked. "Successfully prosecuted?" He had paused. 3. "In 20 years." She had let that sit. Then she had said, "Tell me what made those 3 different from the others." He had told her. She had taken notes in her precise, color-coded system, and she had thought about each of the 3 cases, and she had begun to see the angle. The thing that was different about her case from the ones that had failed. The thing that Min-Jae's investigation had surfaced that the other cases had not had. The dissolved notarization office had not been dissolved cleanly. There was a record. Not in the obvious places, those had been cleared. But in a municipal archive in Lyon's 3rd arrondissement, in a filing that had been overlooked because it was associated with a building lease rather than a legal practice, there was a document that placed a specific person at that office on a specific date. A person whose name connected to the CO subsidiary with the directness of a drawn line. She had found it herself. Not Maître Fontaine. Not the Brussels specialist. Not Min-Jae. Her. At the library desk, at 2 in the morning, with the lamp making its small warm circle and the house quiet around her. She had sat with it for a full minute when she found it. Just sat. Then she had written it down and sent it to Maître Fontaine with a subject line that said simply, "Look at this." Maître Fontaine had called at 7 the following morning. Her voice, which was normally as precisely calibrated as a legal instrument, had a quality in it that Amara had not heard before. "Where did you find this?" she had said. "I was looking in the right place," Amara had said. There had been a pause. Then, "Ms. Okafor. This changes the timeline of the filing significantly." "I know," Amara had said. "This means the preparation for the transfer began weeks before you left for Lagos. This was not opportunistic. This was planned." "I know," Amara had said again. Another pause. "How are you feeling?" It was such an unexpected question, from Maître Fontaine, who had never once asked how she was feeling, who processed everything through the clean lens of legal relevance, that Amara had laughed. Short, surprised. "Like someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time," she had said, "and has just found the last piece." She told Min-Jae over coffee that morning. She handed him the printed document and watched him read it and watched his face do the thing it did, the controlled stillness with something moving underneath. He looked up. "You found this," he said. "I found this," she said. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not entirely read, something that was equal parts pride and something more private, something that had to do not with the document but with her, with the specific quality of her. "Of course you did," he said. She drank her coffee and did not say anything, but something in her chest did the thing it had been doing more frequently, the loosening, the slow, almost imperceptible release of a tension she had carried so long she had stopped noticing its weight until it began, incrementally, to lift. It was on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the card and the letter, that Co Jae-hyun made his 3rd move. He did not come to the estate again. He was too careful for that. Instead, the move came through a different channel entirely, through a journalist. A journalist who wrote for a financial publication that was, as anyone who followed Korean business media knew, editorially sympathetic to the kind of political commercial interests that the CO network represented. The journalist filed a story. The story was about Myri Holdings. More specifically, it was about an alleged conflict of interest in Min-Jae's recent business decisions. Decisions that the article suggested had been influenced by a personal relationship with a foreign national whose legal situation in France was, as the article carefully phrased it, ongoing and contested. It did not name Amara explicitly. It didn't need to. It named Min-Jae. It named the French legal proceedings. It named Myri Holdings and the board and the shareholders. It asked, in the language of journalistic impartiality that is not impartial at all, whether the chairman's recent priorities had been as professionally focused as the company's stakeholders had a right to expect. Min-Jae read the article at his desk on Tuesday morning. Amara read it on her phone, having been sent the link by Maître Fontaine, who had added a single line beneath it, "They're trying to move the battle." She went to the library. He was already there. They looked at each other. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't," he said immediately. Not harshly. Firmly. "Min-Jae. Amara." He set the tablet down. "I knew this was possible. I have known since the dinner that there would be a response. This is the response. They are trying to create pressure through my board because they cannot create it through you." He paused. "They've made a miscalculation." She waited. "They believe," he said, "that I am the kind of man who changes direction when pressure is applied to my professional reputation. They believe that because that is what most men in my position do." He looked at her with an expression that was very clear and very direct. "I am not most men in my position." She knew that. She had known that since the night he had raised one hand at that dinner and every person in the room had gone still. "Your board," she said. "I will handle my board. They'll have questions. I will answer them." He looked at the article one more time and then turned the tablet face down. "The questions they should be asking," he said, "are not about my personal life. They're about why a company with the legal exposure CO Political Holdings now has is running a press strategy the week before a significant filing deadline." He picked up his phone. "I'll make that point clearly." She watched him begin composing a message to his board, and she thought about what it meant, what it actually meant, that this man had walked into the center of something that was not his fight and planted himself there and was still standing. Not because she had asked him to. Not because anyone had. Because he had looked at what was right and then done it, the way he did everything, without announcement, without performance, with the quiet and absolute certainty of someone who had made a decision and would not be undoing it. She thought about Nia. About a 4-year-old walking through a room full of powerful people with a drawing pressed to her chest. She thought, she got it from somewhere. She thought, maybe we both did. The filing in Lyon was scheduled for a Thursday, 6 days away. The days between moved with a specific quality of time before something irreversible. Each one felt both very long and very short, each one full of small ordinary things that existed against the backdrop of the large thing coming. Nia drew. Madame Un cooked things that required eating. The named plants on the terrace continued their patient growing. Mr. Bay managed the estate with his silver-haired precision. The library held its lamplight. The coffee came in 2 cups. On the Wednesday evening before the filing, Amara could not sleep. She lay in the dark room listening to Nia breathe in the small adjacent bed, and she thought about Marseille, and she thought about the locked office door, and she thought about all the distances she had traveled since that morning, measured not in kilometers but in the internal geography of a person who has been broken and has rebuilt and has been broken again and has rebuilt again, and who is now standing at the edge of something that might finally, be the end of the dismantling. She got up. She went to the library. The lamp was on. Min-Jae was not at his desk. The desk was clear, which almost never happened. She stood in the empty room for a moment, which felt different when he wasn't in it, and then she went to the window and looked out at the garden. He was there. He was sitting on the low bench in the garden terrace, in his dark sweater, in the dark, with no visible purpose. Just sitting. The way she had sat in that garden, weeks ago, and cried in the rain without knowing anyone was coming. She put on her coat and went out. He heard the door and looked up. She sat beside him on the bench. Not close enough to crowd. Not far enough to suggest distance. The same way he had done it that night. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. The garden was quiet around them, the named plants in their planters, the small stubborn winter flowers that had refused to yield to the cold. Above them, through a break in the clouds, a few stars. After a while he said, "Are you afraid?" She considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. "No," she said. "I was afraid for a long time. I think I'm past afraid." She paused. "I'm something else. I don't have an exact word for it yet." "Ready," he said. She turned to look at him. "That's the word," he said. "You look ready." She held that for a moment. Let it settle into her the way the right words settle when they arrive, not foreign but familiar, like finding the name for something you have always known. "Yes," she said. "Ready." They sat in the garden in the quiet, and it was the same garden where Nia had named the plants and sung the songs and drawn the pictures of a home that had seemed, at first, like the optimistic fiction of a 4-year-old who had not yet learned to be realistic. It had not been fiction. It had been a drawing of something that was already on its way. "Tomorrow," Amara said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. She looked at the stars through the clouds. She thought about her mother in Lagos, who had never stopped believing the case would be won, who called every Sunday and asked practical questions about the legal proceedings and made Nia describe her week in a mixture of English and Yoruba that was becoming increasingly fluid. She thought about Maitre Fontaine and the Brussels specialist and the municipal archive in Lyon's 3rd arrondissement and a document that connected a name to a date and a date to a deed. She thought about a little girl in a yellow dress walking into a room full of powerful people with a drawing pressed to her chest. Nothing that needed to be said was unsaid between them. That was one of the things that had developed quietly, in the working silences and the garden and the midnight corridors, the capacity to be together without filling the space unnecessarily. To let the quiet mean what it meant rather than rushing to cover it with words. She put her hand in his. His hand closed around hers. They sat in the garden until the clouds closed over the stars again and the air grew colder and the named flowers bent slightly in the night wind, and then they went inside. The filing landed on a Thursday, as scheduled. And if you sat with this story until this very moment, until this quiet garden and these two people and this particular held breath before something enormous turns, then you already understand what it means to be invested in something beyond yourself. That is what stories do. That is what this one was always doing, underneath the chandeliers and the rain and the crayon-colored drawing and the strawberries. It was asking you to care about people, to sit with them in their difficulty, to want things for them the way you want things for people you love. If you felt something while reading this, hold on to that. Come back and tell me what landed for you. Tell me the moment that stayed. Tell me where you are reading from, because I want to know which corner of this world this story has reached, which city, which room, which person at what hour decided to stay. The story is not finished. Amara's hand is in his, but the filing is only filed, not won. Seo Jae-hyun is still a name on a card in a drawer. The journalist's article is still live. The board is still asking questions. And somewhere in all of this, a 4-year-old in a yellow dress is asleep with her rabbit, dreaming, in all probability, of plants she has not yet named. There is more to come. Come back for it. Until then, stay close to the people who sit with you in gardens. Stay close to what is being built. Stay well, wherever you are, and know that somewhere, the house lights are still on.